Okay, so you've deployed the DWA framework and you now want to explore the AdventureWorks sample to sort of see how it works and reverse engineer it, right? So we're going to take you through exploring it, the internals, the basic design pattern, and just running some of what we call the pipelines. So they could be notebooks as well, right? So what is the AdventureWorks? Well, it's a sample ERP star schema that flows through three of the common stages of the data warehouse design, right? Extract, kind of transform, and load. Notice there are other stages like ingest could be bringing information into the lakehouse, and export or refresh can happen after load, but this is the core of loading a star schema. Okay. Um, we break the various stages down within the metadata into these, and generally when we run configuration, we give each pipeline a sequence number, kind of like a chart of accounts. It's a range of numbers. Everything isn't 100 because one thing could have to happen after another one because of dependencies, right? So that's kind of how that works, right? Now, the AdventureWorks only uses three templates: extract in a CSV, extract in Excel, and load. But bear in mind, there are lots and lots of templates, and we have teams of people writing bespoke templates to integrate with Oracle Fusion or Dynamics or anything like that, right? But this is just really a starter set of templates, and the idea is that you can download or make all of your own kind of templates, right? So the first thing that we're going to do is just have a look at the internals of what's deployed, right? So if you run this sort of query, you'll get, I'm just going to run this on SQL Management Studio. So I've set up a registered server connected to the SQL server, and I can start to see the metadata tables that are deployed, right? So the first one is the configurations table. This means that when the metadata passes instructions on, it can tell them which lakehouse and which workspace, but also imagine that you were connected to SharePoint. It would have to give it the path to SharePoint, the path to Key Vault that had the credentials in it, or if it was an FTP site, the host name. So all configuration management of passing how to connect is passed through this configurations table. Templates has a list of the templates that are kind of registered. So anytime that you add a new template, you got to add a row into this to tell it what the name of the template is it a notebook or a pipeline, and if it has any standard configuration that would be assumed. So for example, if I'm loading Excel file, I assume I'm going to overwrite the target kind of table every time, right? Probably not a delta, right? A package group then is a unit of execution. So when I run AdventureWorks, I want to run 5 pipelines or 4 templates. Package groups can be hierarchical. So I could have AdventureWorks the parent, and then AdventureWorks Finance, AdventureWorks Dimensions, and so forth. And then what I'm missing is pipeline groups. Pipeline groups then is the grouping of the work, right? So for example, this contains all the information on how I would load Excel files for the AdventureWorks, right? Any particular settings I'm going to have here, right? Now, this is where we start to get into the metadata of the DWA, right? Pretty much everything uses a source setting, right? What do I want for my source file? What's its file name? What type of file? If it's CSV, has it got a header? What's its delimiter? What's its row terminator? What's its UTF encoding? So parameters that can be different per file. And the target is where do I want to connect to? So the name of the table I'm writing to. At the pipeline group, we set the common ones that are common for all the child pipelines underneath it. So for example, everything that is linked to pipeline group 3 is going to be using this kind of template. Okay, the pipelines table then has the specifics of the individual unit of work, right? So here I'm extracting some kind of tables. Notice in the source settings then I have the lowest level of configuration, like this is a star.csv is the name of the file that I'm reading. So you can create a template that does lots of files at once, right? So you don't have to have one pipeline per file. If they're all read in the same way, it could make sense to just do them all at once, right? Loading the star schema, we do generally have a separate row per file because they might have different configurations. And we put a link to what the table is on the configurations. So for modeling the star schema, there's another meta table called config.edw tables or tables. And this stores all of the dimensions, all of the facts, whether they're a dimension of facts, and where the transform comes from, which could be a view or a stored proc or a table. Because, say, for example, a notebook could have created a silver layer integration table, right? Information on what the keys are, and then a lot of optional flags to control how we want to load our star schema. Now we're going to gloss over that because there's a whole section itself of loading and configuring the load of star kind of schemas. But the idea is that when we run this stored procedure, you'll then get all of the metadata, what we call compiled. So it takes all of these kind of tables, flattens them out, and says that when I execute, this is what I'm going to connect to from my source for my target. This is what the individual kind of settings are going to be. This is a notebook. And environment specific wise, what is the actual GUID in my workspace to invoke that, right? If you're running a notebook, there's a session tag to say, do I want to reuse the same Spark session for each of those? So that's kind of the configuration database here, right? Now let's go to AdventureWorks to just run our first unit test, right? So we know we have a bunch of CSVs and Excel files and we want to bring them in. So the first thing that you're going to need is a template, okay? So I'm going to go to my installation. And if I go to my DWA folder, in my library here is all my templates. So the idea is that you can build, design, develop your own kind of templates, or there might be samples that we can supply or build for you if you're using us for consultancy. So we go to extract. Extract CSV is by far one of the most common ones, right? What this takes is all of the templates take the same parameter block. So that's a foundational underpinning of the DWA framework: source settings, target settings, source connection settings, sync connection settings, activity settings, and a lineage key to which kind of traces the kind of data through the data warehouse, right? Now for unit testing, you can open up the notebook and have additional and change these just to check that it works. So I'm just going to connect to the Spark session, and just to show you how these will eventually be passed, when I go back to SQL Management Studio, you'll see that when I run the pipeline queue to get a queue of the work, you'll see it's basically given me all the input parameters of the actual project kind of uses, right? Now I've just hard coded in as a unit test those, and I'm going to click run. Okay. Now, obviously, you can read a CSV and write to Spark in a few lines of Python, right? But the template that we have is a little bit more extensive because it does things like loading kind of multiple CSVs. You put a wildcard in, it can load kind of 20 at once. It could put 20 CSVs into one table or create kind of multiple tables depending on whether you've supplied a file name. It'll also support cleaning of the column names. So, for example, there's a reserved kind of characters and code here to clean up column names. If there's a flag, it can put a checksum automatically on that. It can do a dedupe automatically and stuff like that. So just some enhance. Oh yeah, and it can also do a merge. So if you're creating like like an ODS, or your bronze layer has all of history and there's incremental files coming in, you can just configure one of the settings to be a merge, right? So that's kind of the idea behind it. So it's a little bit more sophisticated, but when I run that, you'll see that that's going to quite happily work there, right? Now, this is taken from the unit test folder, so I'm actually going to take them from a different place. So rather than unit test folder, I want to use landing AW. And I'm going to put that to AW staging. We don't really need the word staging because that's kind of implicit, right? But because it's in a lake house, right? But I'll leave it there anyway, right? Okay, so that's now going to load all CSVs and it's run. So this is a sample invocation. It'd be quite easy to change all the parameters to do something completely different, right? So let's see this running now, and at the bottom you can see that it's extracting those. Oh, did that just do one file? Sorry, no, it's going to loop through all the files. Hopefully, there you go. There you go. Hope as it warms up, it'll get a bit faster. Now, this is using Spark to do the writing. There are other engines that are faster, like DuckDB, but Spark is a little bit more featured because it can do things like merging, which is quite sophisticated, right? So that's my extract of my CSV. It's a second or so per file. So that's my first kind of template. While it's running, I want to look at another template, perhaps Excel files, right? Imagine I've got Excel files, right? So we have those in AdventureWorks as well. Go to my demo. Go back to my library, my extract library. You see extract Excel. Here we go. And this is going to take all my Excel files from there. Now, this has already got the correct parameters there, right? So that's good. So I'm going to run this. And this is going to bring, I think there's 2 Excel files in that kind of staging area, right? So again, with these more sophisticated notebooks, obviously if you were to write one yourself, you could do it in much fewer lines of code. If it was just very much kind of simpler. But we scroll down to the end, we see that it's executing. Oh, sorry. I did have the wrong folder. It was just landing AW, right? Yeah. Try that again. There you go. You can see it's read some rows from the first sheet, and it's going to write that to a table, and then it's going to do that for the next one as well. So the idea is you can reuse and tune these kind of notebooks, but you're only going to use them once, and then all projects across the entire enterprise share the same kind of notebooks. So here's that working for AdventureWorks, right? Now this is unit testing because I'm kind of manually doing that, right? So what if I want to kind of run that through automation now, right? So I've got my stored procedure that's passing all the parameters, but I want to get that passed through it. This is where the pipeline controller and worker come into it, right? If I go up to here, go to DWA, I've got a pipeline controller, and what this will do is it will take a parameter of a package group, okay? So if you look at the parameters, I can take a package group. It will call a stored procedure to say, hey, what sequence numbers do I have? Like 100 is ingest, 200 is extract, maybe 300 is transform and load, right? And then for each of those, it will call a worker that will in parallel execute all the artifacts, pipelines, notebooks that are needed, right? So just a simple demonstration. Rather than run the pipeline controller, I'm going to jump straight to the worker, which is if you just want to run a small kind of unit of 1 or 2 files, you can run it via the worker, right? And I just want to run one pipeline just to see. Let's try pipeline 2, which is bringing in all the CSVs. Now, how do I know which pipeline it is? Because when I run the queue, you can see pipeline 2. So it's going to pass all of these parameters, find the appropriate template, and dynamically execute it, right? So let's run this. Notice as it's running, the stored procedure that it calls a USP pipeline queue is the exact same stored procedure that I use to compile all of the metadata, right? So let's leave that running. So you can see here that it's got the unit of work to do. So we can see the output of, it's got the output, sorry, of the stored procedure pipeline queue here. So I click on the output window. We can see it got all of the metadata that was going to execute. It passed that into the for loop. The for loop hit a switch statement. The switch statement then said which activity do we want to run based on the template type. I want to run a notebook, and then it passes all the parameters are dynamically passed, including the notebook ID of which kind of notebook to execute. So I never change the code of the pipeline kind of worker as I'm adding new artifacts. That's going to happen automatically. So that's finished. You see it took it 22 seconds to load all of the CSVs, right? Now, what if I wanted to do multiple things at once now, right? So from a unit test to orchestration. So say, for example, I run the pipeline controller. I could say run the pipeline controller, and it takes a parameter of a package group. It also takes a stage, right? So remember we said there were 5, 6 stages. I could say just run all of the extracts, okay? Now when it runs, the pipeline controller is going to get a enumeration of how many sequences are in that stage, kind of 100, 200, 300. Because it's the extract, it's probably only one, and it's going to call the worker who's going to run them all in parallel now. Here we go. So that's a bit further into the execution. So we can see that the controller called a worker. It passed the sequence, and we're just going to look at the sequence number. It only found one kind of sequence. So it said that's an extract kind of sequence, and it called a pipeline worker. I go to the pipeline worker, and we can see that the worker called a notebook that brought in the CSVs. But it also, in parallel, ran, you can see that these kind of start at the same time, launched another notebook. And notice because of the session tag, it's going to launch them on the same Spark cluster to load a bunch of Excel files. So you can see that's there. And if I really wanted to, I could click on the I could click on the notebook to go to snapshot to see all of the diagnostics and the actual output of the notebook as it was running. So that's an example of just wait for this to come up. There we go. So you can see that's the parameters that were just the kind of unit test ones, but this is the parameters that were actually put into play, that were actually run. And then if I scroll down, I can see, there we go. Didn't actually find anything, that's fine. Great, so that's an example of it running. If I wanted to run the entire extract, transform, and load, I could go up to the pipeline controller and I could run it and just in the stage, just have all. And this would then load all of the star schema kind of tables as well. So that's a starting point in exploring the initial AdventureWorks example and how we can automate the launching of the templates.